Is Britain still a free country, or has it slipped into something darker without the people even realising it? In just 3 short weeks, over 700 farmers, mothers, pensioners, and ordinary voters have been dragged away from their homes, not for crimes, but for refusing to bow to new government rules. Families are weeping, villages are blockaded, and now Buckingham Palace itself has been shaken to its core. Sources from inside reveal that King Charles is furious, so furious that he directly confronted Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a call described by insiders as explosive. The question now is simple but terrifying. How much longer can Britain survive this clash between a monarch defending his people and a government determined to silence them? The wave of arrests that has ripped through Britain is unlike anything seen in modern history. What began as a government measure, branded necessary for stability, has spiraled into one of the darkest chapters of Starmer's premiership. Over 700 arrests in 21 days, numbers that would be expected in a dictatorship, not in the land that once stood as a beacon of freedom. But who are these people filling police vans and makeshift detention centres? They are not violent extremists, criminals, or foreign agitators. They are farmers chaining themselves to barns to protect land that has been in their families for generations. They are mothers daring to question council members about heating costs. They are elderly pensioners standing outside town halls with signs reading, "Let us speak." The government labels them non-compliant, but to their communities, they are nothing less than martyrs of free speech. At the centre of this storm lies Starmer's most controversial law to date, a new farmland inheritance tax designed to revalue agricultural property at grossly inflated rates. This measure, pushed through Parliament with minimal debate, has shattered rural Britain. Families already reeling from high energy bills and rising food prices now face the threat of losing land that has been passed down through bloodlines for centuries. Farmers describe it as the death of rural life. In Kent, a 74-year-old man chained himself to his tractor in defiance. He was dragged away in front of his grandchildren by helmeted riot police, his only words as he was taken, "This is our home, not theirs to sell." That scene, captured on video, spread like wildfire across the nation, igniting outrage and fear in equal measure. What is most shocking is not just the arrests themselves, but the way they are being carried out. These are not neighbourhood constables mediating disputes, but full riot units, armed with shields, batons, and tear gas, deployed against peaceful communities. In Norfolk, villagers who gathered to sing hymns in protest were surrounded, kettled, and dispersed with tear gas. In Yorkshire, families were dragged out of community halls mid-meeting, accused of obstructing government representatives. The message from the state is chillingly clear: opposition will not be tolerated. But the real turning point came when one video, more shocking than the rest, reached Buckingham Palace. It showed a disabled veteran seated in his wheelchair holding a sign that read, "This is not the Britain I fought for." As police tightened cuffs around his wrists, his cry for dignity echoed across the internet. Within hours, the clip landed on the king's desk. According to palace insiders, Charles was visibly shaken. Witnesses described him slamming his fist on the table, declaring, "This is tyranny in plain sight." His anger was not symbolic. It was personal, visceral, and immediate. Behind the palace walls, a storm was brewing. Charles reportedly demanded a private briefing with his advisors, reviewing footage from Kent, Yorkshire, and Essex. One aide, speaking anonymously, said, "I have never seen His Majesty so enraged. He feels this is not just a political crisis, but a moral collapse." That same night, he placed a direct call to Keir Starmer. It was not ceremonial. It was confrontational. Reports suggest Charles warned the Prime Minister that Britain itself was being torn apart. "You are testing the patience of the people," the King allegedly told him. "If trust is lost, it cannot be recovered." These were not words spoken lightly. They were the words of a monarch staring into the abyss of national disintegration. But Starmer, ever cold and calculated, did not yield. Days later, when pressed by journalists in Glasgow about both the arrests and the King's warning, he dismissed it all as theatrics. He doubled down instead, chillingly declaring, "We will not tolerate disruption disguised as protest. Anyone who undermines national unity will face the full force of the law." His words were as much a challenge to the monarchy as they were to the public. It was a declaration of authority, a message that not even the king would sway his iron grip. That response ignited fury across the country. Silent marches began flooding city streets, candles raised high, signs reading, "We are not afraid." In London, tens of thousands passed Parliament in silence. In Birmingham, churches opened their doors not only for prayer, but for organising legal defence for those arrested. In Scotland, communities began hosting clandestine meetings, quietly planning resistance and legal petitions. Britain was no longer a nation debating policy. It was a nation bracing for battle, between people and power, between liberty and control. Inside the palace, the crisis deepened. Advisors were torn. Some urged Charles to remain silent, warning that any public statement could plunge the country into constitutional chaos. Others urged him to act, declaring that silence would make the monarchy complicit in Britain's moral collapse. One insider said it best: "If the king does not act now, when democracy itself is crumbling, then what is the point of having a king at all?" For the first time in generations, whispers began to spread of a royal intervention not seen since the 1930s, an address that could shake the very foundations of Britain's constitutional balance. But time is running out. Starmer's government grows bolder each day, surrounding itself with loyal enforcers and legal bulldogs who believe this storm will pass. A leaked internal memo from Labour's leadership spoke of reconditioning the public to new stability norms. For those who read it, the words carried a nicey warning. The crackdown is not temporary. It is the beginning of a new order. The question now is no longer if Britain is free, but if Britain will ever be free again. The situation across Britain is escalating with each passing day, and the signs of fracture are visible in every corner of society. What began as anger in rural farmlands has spread into the heart of the cities, where citizens who once believed such repression could never touch them are now discovering otherwise. The Starmer administration has weaponized vague new laws that criminalized non-compliance with public order and undermining national stability. These phrases are deliberately broad, giving the government unchecked authority to detain anyone who questions policy or refuses to submit quietly. Once an accusation is made, the burden of proof vanishes. Individuals are seized, often without explanation, and held in secret facilities away from lawyers, media, and family. This is not theoretical. It is happening now in Britain, a nation once celebrated for habeas corpus, the right to a fair trial, and the rule of law. Those sacred principles are being dismantled before the eyes of its citizens. In Manchester, an entire youth group was arrested after hosting a candlelight vigil for the farmers of Kent. The group's crime: sharing speeches online that criticised the government's heavy-handed policies. In Liverpool, a mother was pulled from a town hall meeting after asking a councilman why energy bills had doubled. Her words were deemed obstructive behaviour, and she was dragged away before her neighbours in disbelief. In Cornwall, a schoolteacher was suspended after showing students an article critical of Labour's crackdown. The chilling effect is spreading. Cafes, churches, even family homes have grown quieter, not because people no longer care, but because they are terrified that someone listening may report them. Across the nation, whispers of dissent have been replaced with silence, the kind of silence that breeds fear but also fuels underground defiance. The Starmer government insists that these arrests are lawful and necessary. Officials describe protesters as agitators and threats to stability, repeating the same lines in carefully choreographed press conferences. But outside these polished appearances, the truth is leaking through. Human rights advocates, senior barristers, and even former judges have raised alarm, warning that the government's new laws are incompatible with democratic freedoms. Legal scholars describe them as tools of tyranny, laws that enable the state to strip liberties in the name of unity. Yet when challenged, Starmer remains unmoved. His public addresses grow sharper, colder, and more authoritarian. The Prime Minister believes he can outlast the dissent, that fear will smother resistance, and that order will return once people are broken into compliance. His arrogance blinds him to the reality that every act of suppression only hardens opposition further. Meanwhile, the monarchy finds itself at a breaking point. Buckingham Palace is not merely a ceremonial stage anymore, but a fortress under pressure. Every day, letters pour in, petitions, pleas, and desperate calls for help. From citizens who feel abandoned by Parliament, betrayed by their government, and silenced by their police. Protesters gather outside royal estates, not with rage, but with desperation. Their signs read, "Speak for us, Your Majesty, and save our democracy." For the first time in decades, the monarch is being asked to do more than wave from balconies or cut ribbons. He is being asked to defend the soul of the nation. The weight of this demand is crushing. Charles, who has long believed in quiet diplomacy, is now caught in a storm he cannot ignore. Insiders describe a man tormented, reading reports late into the night, replaying videos of arrests, and holding emergency councils with legal scholars and advisors. Those inside the palace describe the debates as fierce. One camp urges silence, warning that the king's involvement could trigger a constitutional crisis that would destabilize the nation even further. Another camp insists that silence itself is betrayal, that neutrality in the face of tyranny is complicity. One advisor put it starkly: if the king does not act, he will be remembered not as the defender of Britain, but as the monarch who watched freedom die in silence. The divide has paralyzed the palace, but the pressure from outside grows heavier by the hour. Every day without a statement is seen by the people as hesitation, and hesitation in moments of crisis breeds doubt. For many citizens, Charles is their last hope, and hope delayed begins to feel like hope denied. At the same time, the brutality of the crackdown is becoming darker and more organized. Reports are emerging of temporary detention centers hastily set up in warehouses, military bases, and abandoned factories. The government calls them stabilization facilities. Human rights groups call them black sites. Families describe loved ones disappearing into these facilities for days or weeks, often without charge or explanation. Some return home broken, silent, and terrified, while others never return at all. The state offers no answers, no records, and no accountability. Instead, spokespeople repeat the same rehearsed lines. All detentions are lawful under national stability measures. But those words ring hollow against the haunting reality of citizens vanishing into the shadows of government control. The international community is beginning to take notice. Amnesty International has condemned Britain's treatment of peaceful protesters, while the European Court of Human Rights has demanded explanations. Some EU partners have even suspended cooperation on civil rights agreements with the UK, citing reputational damage. Britain, once proud of its image as a democratic stronghold, is now being compared to nations notorious for authoritarian rule. Yet Starmer remains defiant. In a leaked private speech, he allegedly told Labour officials that resistance would burn itself out, and that people always return to order after chaos. His words reveal not a leader addressing grievances, but a ruler calculating how long it will take to crush dissent. But Britain is not breaking as quickly as Starmer imagines. Instead, quiet networks of resistance are growing. Volunteers deliver food and medicine to families of the arrested. Lawyers form secret committees to challenge the new laws. Communities develop encrypted channels to share information and organize protests beyond the government's reach. In Newcastle, citizens staged a silent protest outside government offices, standing motionless for an hour, holding nothing but blank black signs. In Leeds, one protester held a sign with no words at all, only a square of black paper. These acts may seem small, but their symbolism is profound. Silence is being turned into defiance, and every act of resistance chips away at the wall of fear the government is trying to build. Through it all, King Charles watches. He may not wield executive power, but his moral authority is immense. Each day that passes without his voice grows heavier, not only for the people, but for the monarch himself. Insiders whisper that he feels trapped, torn between the duty to remain neutral and the duty to defend his people. The longer he waits, the more the country fractures, and the more fractured it becomes, the harder it will be to heal. The stage is set for a confrontation that could redefine Britain's identity. Starmer believes he holds all the cards, but the one power he cannot silence forever is the will of the people and the moral authority of their king. As the shocking news of the mass arrests spread across the country, the public mood shifted from confusion to outrage, and the atmosphere became explosive. Farmers, already feeling abandoned by Starmer's government due to years of harsh regulations, rising costs, and suffocating climate mandates, now saw themselves as direct targets of state power. For decades, they had been the backbone of Britain's food supply. But with one sweeping move, Starmer had criminalized their resistance, painting them as enemies of progress. The number, 700 farmers and voters dragged into custody, was not just a statistic, it was a symbol of how far the government was willing to go to enforce compliance. Across rural villages and small towns, people whispered in disbelief, asking how long it would be before police vans arrived at their own doors. The fear that once lingered quietly in the background had now turned into panic, and panic turned into fury. In markets, in pubs, and in family kitchens, the same question was being asked. If farmers, the most hard-working and patriotic citizens, could be silenced and arrested, then who would be next? King Charles's outrage at the arrests was not just personal, it was historical. The monarchy has long held a symbolic duty to safeguard the traditions and values of the British people. The king, bound by his role as a constitutional monarch, was expected to remain neutral. But even he could no longer stay silent as Starmer pushed Britain into uncharted territory. He saw the arrests as a direct assault on freedom, an attack on democracy itself, and a betrayal of the people he had sworn to represent. Sources close to Buckingham Palace reported that Charles was furious at being sidelined, as Starmer and his ministers pressed ahead without consulting him or even acknowledging the gravity of the backlash. For a monarch known for his patience and diplomacy, his sudden eruption was a sign that Britain was facing a crisis of legitimacy. It wasn't just Starmer's political future that was at stake, it was the stability of the nation. Charles was reportedly demanding emergency meetings, speaking with senior advisors, and reaching out to political figures across the spectrum, determined to make his anger known. Meanwhile, inside Downing Street, the Labour leadership was on edge. Starmer and his inner circle believed they were waging a necessary war against what they described as dangerous resistance to government policy. In their eyes, farmers refusing to comply with new agricultural mandates were undermining progress on climate targets and threatening the broader agenda of transforming Britain. But this justification fell flat with the public, who saw the arrests as heavy-handed and authoritarian. Even many within Labour's own ranks whispered about the risks of pushing too far, too fast. Some MPs warned privately that the party was on the brink of tearing itself apart, with growing dissent threatening to boil over. Yet Starmer, stubborn and unyielding, pressed on, convinced that his vision for the country must be enforced at all costs, no matter how unpopular it became. His gamble was enormous, and his defiance of both the king and the people set the stage for a clash unlike anything Britain had witnessed in generations. The streets of London soon reflected the growing tension. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, waving banners demanding freedom and justice for the arrested farmers. Social media exploded with videos of families crying as their loved ones were taken away in police vans, images that only added fuel to the fire. Hashtags calling for Starmer's resignation began trending worldwide, drawing international attention to the crisis. Allies of Britain abroad watched nervously, wondering if the United Kingdom was slipping into a state of political turmoil that could destabilize the global stage. For ordinary citizens, the reality was simple: their faith in government was broken. What once seemed like a disagreement over policy had now escalated into a full-scale confrontation between the rulers and the ruled, with the king himself being drawn into the fight. But the most dangerous consequence of all was the unifying effect these arrests had on the opposition. Groups that once disagreed, farmers, voters from working-class towns, small business owners, even disillusioned Labour supporters, now stood side by side in opposition to the government's crackdown. Nigel Farage and Reform UK quickly seized the moment, framing the arrests as proof that Starmer's Labour had lost touch with the people and was spiralling into authoritarianism. Conservative figures, though weakened, also found their voice again, sensing that the scandal could be their opportunity to claw back relevance. Across Britain, a storm was brewing, and Starmer was caught in the eye of it. He had lit a fire that he could no longer control, and with King Charles openly furious, his grip on power grew weaker by the hour.